This is Platemark with me, Ann Shafer. I'm an independent curator who focuses on works on paper, and that includes prints, drawings, photographs, and even books. Sorry, book people. Platemark is a podcast about prints and the printmaking ecosystem. Prints meaning fine art prints, usually limited editions, although not always. We're talking about etchings, woodcuts, lithographs, screen prints, that sort of thing. And I am doing it because I am the chief evangelizer trying to support the print ecosystem by introducing you to people who occupy various roles in this ecosystem, and that includes artists, of course, but also printers and print publishers, gallery people, museum curators, art historians, authors, you name it. Together, we are going to educate you about this corner of the art world and share with you stories that include and hopefully will make more understandable some of the challenging technical parts and bits of printmaking. I am hoping to open up this corner of the art world to you where people are, by necessity, because you always need help at a print shop, the most collaborative, welcoming, generous, and gifted people in the art world. They are amongst the nicest people you will meet. The print fairs that you will go to blow other fairs away by their welcoming attitude. People will talk to you and engage you and tell you how they made the thing that you are looking at with the artist that came in to make that thing. I think it's just the most, I don't want to say cozy really, but it is the most charming spot in the art world, if you ask me. I like genuine. I want genuine people, and I want genuine artists, and I want genuine people helping artists make genuine things. So that is why I am here and why I'm sharing all of these stories with you, helping you understand better why prints are special, worthy of your attention, and often misunderstood. The other reason, of course, to love prints is that often they're made in multiples, which means the price points are much, much lower. It's a terrific gateway into collecting art. You can collect things by really famous artists for 10x less than you would a work in another medium like painting or sculpture. So that's what we're doing here. My guest today is Peter Pettengill. He is the founder and printer of Wingate Studio in Hinsdale, New Hampshire. Peter's been a printer for a long time. He got his start with Crown Point Press back in the day out in California, a shop that specializes in etching primarily and is best known for their multiple plate color etching. Peter has some really fascinating and wonderful stories about various projects and artists that he worked with over time. He's working now with his son James, who has taken over the business, and he is semi-retired. My favorite story of his is about setting fire to a press in order to print an edition for John Cage, but we talk about so much more, find out about his really unique and interesting working relationship with Walton Ford, for instance. Okay, housekeeping. I identify as a cis-het white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. Images that Peter and I talk about will be over in the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. And over there, you'll find a few other things. You can sign on to get onto our newsletter email list. We send out notices of new episodes and occasional other interesting things. So come on over and sign on for our email list. And also head over to Facebook and jump onto our Facebook group. You can join the fun. We chit-chat about all sorts of things. I think that's it. Let's get rolling. Good morning, Peter. It's so great to see you. Thanks for coming on Platemark today.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, you've been on my list for a long time. The first order of business is for you to introduce yourself.
Well, my name's Peter Pettengill. I'm the founder, one of the main force behind Wingate Studio, where we print etchings, monoprints, relief prints, and we publish them. Wingate is located in the southwestern corner of New Hampshire, kind of tucked into the Connecticut River Valley. It's about 20 miles from where I grew up, actually. And Wingate, the studio itself, is at a farm that was owned by my grandparents when I was growing up around here. So Wingate was a dairy farm over the years. they stopped doing that. And my grandfather actually became a portrait photographer. So he had the first Wingate Studio, and I just took the name when we settled here back in 1985. I grew up around here. I had a sort of odd journey into printmaking. I ended up on the West Coast, and I was working at Crown Point Press for about 6 years. Came back here in 1985 when our first child, James, was born, and started the studio then. Grew from very humble kind of beginnings, and we've expanded a lot over the years, and we have been pretty busy since 1985.
When you started, were you intending to be a publishing studio like Crown Point Press? Was that the plan?
Well, I had been at Crown Point. I knew that model. That's kind of how I was trained to work. But I started with very bare bones, and I actually started just doing editioning work. The limited editions club figures prominently in my beginnings, because when I came back here, I thought maybe I would teach. This is the 5 college area. We have Smith College, Hampshire College, Amherst College, University of Massachusetts, and Mount Holyoke, all within a pretty close radius. So I went around and met a number of the print people in this area, and Western Massachusetts particularly was an area of a lot of book arts work, some great letterpress printers and typesetters, a lot of binders. And so I went around to meet some of those people, and it turned out a lot of them were working for the Limited Editions Club, which was run by Ben Schiff, or actually was owned and run by Sid Schiff. Ben was Sid's son. And at the time that I started up with them, Ben was kind of being the production coordinator for all their work. And they were doing a lot of, fairly large edition fine art books, up to hundreds in some cases. So they needed a lot of printers. And he just said, would you print some things for us? And I said, sure, except I didn't have a studio. And that's where my grandmother was still alive here at the farm. There were a lot of very empty outbuildings. It's an old dairy farm. And she said, sure, take over the old wood shop and the calf barn. And that's kind of what happened. I very quickly winterized a space in the old barn, and then rented a press from one of the printers I had met, down when I first went around, John Goodman, who was an amazing photogravure, printmaker, plate maker. And I just started in printing, built a few flat files and some shelves and a hot plate. And that's how it got started.
I'm sort of speechless. So you just sort of was like, I'm just going to do this thing. And you did it. It's really amazing to me.
I mean, I knew how to do it, or at least I thought I did. The first things I was printing here were photogravures, things that John Goodman himself had made. The very first limited editions project that I worked on was the Arthur Rimbaud Season in Hell that had photogravures by Robert Mapplethorpe. So I was printing these, kind of small Mapplethorpe gravures, but in pretty large editions. They made hundreds of these. I can't remember the exact number. And so they were kind of farmed out to different printers. Paul Taylor and his then wife, Clary Nelson, printed some up here in Hinsdale, and other printers in the area. Bob Townsend even printed some of these. And I thought, well, I know a lot about printing. This is going to be easy. I got the press set up, and photogravures were so different from what I was used to printing. And it really took me a while to get the hang of it. And, but by the time I did, I got a lot of practice at it, because it was really just about wiping plates and printing them all day long. And then over time, they wanted me to be able to maybe work with some of the artists that they were publishing. And so I gradually built things up so where I could do plate making. I had to get water into the barn, and, it's an old barn, so it's a little leaky, and we've got all new roofs on it now, but in some eras it was a little wet around here. So I kept at that with Limited Editions Club. And then by the time I was making plates for them, there were other people around that I knew who I figured, well, I can work with them too. Maybe, most of it was contract work in those days. I didn't have the means to publish really anything. I was broke and I had two young kids pretty quickly. And, we're living here in New Hampshire or it's really right on the Massachusetts and Vermont borders. We're kind of right in that spot north. So anyway, that it grew in that way, kind of organically, I guess.
Yeah.
And printmaking being a field where it's really a matter of troubleshooting problems, you just figure things out. It may take you a while, but that's how we do it.
Now, when you said that inking and printing the photogravure plates was very different from what you had been doing at Crown Point, what are the differences?
Well, the photogravure process creates a really amazing continuous tone plate, but it's a lot shallower than some of the etching that I was used to doing. And so it required much more pressure than I ever thought. I couldn't figure out for a long time why it didn't look crisp and nice. And then John would look at him and say, "Oh, you just got to use more pressure." And I'd put it down and it still wasn't quite there. And he said, "No, you just have to use more pressure." And they had a specific way of setting up blankets using really thin, fine felts, which thankfully in those days we could get easily. Once I got all that ironed out and got a pipe to get the French tool pressed down, they started looking good. And I ended up on that print, the plates went to different people. I think there were 9 plates involved. Beautiful, beautiful gravures. A self-portrait of him with horns, the gun firing, just some really amazing things. But by the end of the regular edition, I got all the plates and then printed a portfolio edition of them, which was on a larger sheet. They wanted to do them chincolet, but for some reason they ended up being kind of surface rolls of ink, toned ink over the surface. So we would wipe the plate, give it a roll with a kind of tinted oil, and then I would have to really carefully, they wanted me to clean the edges of the plate into the image so that the image itself had the color, but the edges were white. So that was, kind of a picky, long job. But that was an addition of something like 50. So with 9 plates, that kept me busy for quite a while.
The wiping of the edges basically was to trompe l'oeil the effect of a chincolet?
Well, the chincolet wouldn't have looked like that,
right.
But for some reason, that is what they wanted on
Funny.
these. And chincolet probably would have been easier. I mean, over the years doing the book work, we worked out ways of working with chincolet where we could work really quickly and pretty accurately, especially with something that's that small in size. These were pretty small plates to start with.
Right. That was the good
but
news.
The book is it's a beautiful book, and it's kind of an amazing pairing of artist and author, I think. Really appropriate.
I'd completely forgotten about limited editions. Were they somewhere near you? Where were they?
No, they were in New York City.
Oh, okay.
It had been bought. I mean, it was an old club that had kind of fallen into trade type publications, I think. And then Sid Schiff bought it probably just a few years before I ran into them. And he really revamped it, and he started getting real artists. Ben was largely responsible for a lot of that because he was just fearless, and he seemed to be able to meet almost anybody. I later on worked with Ben a lot as a publisher, doing contract work for him, and we did projects, with with Saul LeWitt, with Robert Ryman, and of course with Louise Bourgeois for many years. So.
But you'd worked didn't you work with LeWitt at Crown Point? Did I dream that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you already had a relationship.
I was at Crown Point from 1978, late 78 to 1985. It was a really amazing time to be there. And it's just complete happenstance that I ended up there. I tell the story a lot, so people who know me know this already. I went to school here in the Valley at University of Massachusetts. I was an English major. I studied comp lit. And history and some kind of avant-garde film things. But I wasn't trained as an artist at all. And when I went to California, I was going there to become a librarian, basically. I wanted to go to UC Berkeley and get a library science degree. I had worked in some libraries. I thought, okay, this is a good place. And ironically, you have to be a resident. So I figured I'll go out there and I'll live for a year and work. And then during that year, I'll apply. I ended up about a block and a half below the campus of UC Berkeley, working at a place called Pettengill Bookbindery, which was there. And I was working in a cafe in a Chinese restaurant, block away. And I thought, well, darn it, I think bookbinding sounds really cool. And I'm just going to go ask for a job there. It was run by a couple who had bought it, the Hirschbergs, Ted and Shirley. They were marvelous. And it was a real bindery. I mean, they did a lot of trade binding because they did theses for UC students, but they did a lot of leather work and, hand sewn things and a lot of stamping. And so I learned to bookbind there. They said, well, your name's Pettengill. I guess we have to give you the job. I spent probably the better part of a year there doing that, binding various things. And that is, in fact, where I was working one day when a young kid came in and asked about where you found people to do binding. He said, I've got a little bindery and I need someone to work in it. And he was young, he was a 16 or 17-year-old kid, kind of shy. But I said, well, I'm just making minimum wage here. I'll come check it out. And so I did. And the bindery turned out to be Catherine's basement at her house in Berkeley. And the person who came in was Kevin Parker, who was Catherine's son. So I didn't know anything about what Crown Point was. I'd read a lot of John Cage and looked at a lot of avant-garde film stuff. And so I started noticing things around that there's a little Klaus Oldenburg drawing on the wall, and I could recognize that. I knew enough about art. And then they said something about John Cage, and I said, oh, I'm a huge fan of John Cage. And they pulled out a portfolio that he had made, and they started showing me the prints, and it was in a little case, like they were going to want me to make bindings like that. And Catherine was part of the interview with Kevin. She said, well, if you take the job, you'll probably meet John because he comes every year and he, to work. And that was pretty much all I needed. And that was a cool thing. So I had a really lovely time working. It was minimally set up, but I wasn't doing anything fancy or complicated. And, I'd listen to KPFA in the mornings and all the great shows they had, and just by myself bind books and do that. And I made a couple portfolio case sets. And then at some point, Saul had come to the press. I hadn't even been down to the press, so I didn't know anything about that. And Saul LeWitt had come to work, and he was working on a project of straight line geometric forms. But he had another idea for something he wanted to do, and Catherine didn't have enough printers. So she asked Kevin, her son, to come down and head up a second project. And there was one printer available, Paul Singdalson, and then he asked me to come down and help out with that. They needed an extra pair of hands. So that was in late 78, and that was my first experience was making a Saul LeWitt book at Crown Point Press called Crown Point. And that, I do remember the first day I walked into the place and saw what was going on. I didn't understand it, but I got it that it was really, this is a good place. So the printers were all pretty young. There were 5 printers at that time, and things were really booming. It was a good time to be at Crown Point. I have a list of artists. I wrote down, I think it's about 17 artists I worked with in the years that I was there. And there were some real stretches there. You had to work with people that were really doing unusual things a lot of the time. But starting with Saul, working with John a couple of times over the years. Those were real high points. I did other projects with Saul there later on, and things were really booming in those years. Richard Diebenkorn was working at the press at that time. I didn't work directly with him, but I was around him a lot. And he had just started into making the color prints, and so that was really great for Kath, and that paid for a lot of other work, And she was pretty brave. She would take loans, and she did it as a business. She didn't get grants, and she had no other sources of funding. She had to just go to the bank and get loans. And I mean, I think at the time I was there was probably a clerical staff of 6 or 7, and there were a couple people in the frame shop, and there were 5 printers. And then they were opening a New York gallery space on Broadway.
I didn't know that.
Catherine hired Karen McCready away from Pace, or maybe she had left Pace at that time. And so she became our salesperson. There was an earlier salesperson, Thomas Way, who manned the New York studio, but would come to Oakland periodically. The press was in Oakland at this time. He was there for a while, and after he left, it was discovered that there were some Diebenkorn proofs missing.
Oh, no.
And shortly after that, they were being offered for sale down in L.A. He had gone to work at L.A. Louvre, I think, for a little while. I don't think they ever caught him, but they at least caught up to the fact that these weren't, he had colored the prints, I think, too.
What?
It was kind of amazing. It's hard when you have a studio that's working with that many artists all the time to keep track of all the work. I mean, it just piles up everywhere. And they had things stored over at Beacons. My wife, Deb, who ended up working at the press sometime after I started, did a lot of other projects there. One of her big things was working on the silk project that Catherine had, where artists who had been coming to work would also work with Deb, and they would make designs on kimonos and other kinds of wearable silk, and she would dye it and create these amazing pieces.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're not very well known.
Wow.
We worked here in the studio with Sebastian Black quite a while back, but he's friends with Eva LeWitt. And when he and his wife heard about the silk work, they kind of said, wow, can we show this work in New York? And he just took him to his studio and had a month-long show of the pieces in his studio in Brooklyn. So, some people know about him. Eva had one, I think, from her dad, but they are amazing. Deb still has pretty much a whole set. So.
Oh, I need pictures.
Yeah, next time.
We should have Deb on. That's incredible. I didn't know that. I know Deb is an artist, and I know she's interested in fabrics and fiber, whatever you call it these days. But I did not know that she had worked at Crown Point and doing a fabric.
Oh gosh, she did everything, and she was the one who had to go over to Beacons and kind of dig prints out and make lists of what was there and what wasn't there. And I think she was part of the crew that discovered the missing prints. But Karen was quite amazing, and she brought a real level of professionalism, I think, to that.
But what you're saying, really, Peter, is that you kind of fell in it.
Well, I did, and I didn't know the first thing about printing, but I think Catherine was looking for people with a certain temperament and with those kind of, skills like hand-eye coordination kind of things. It's not a job for real brainiacs, but the Crown Point crews worked in teams, which was fantastic. There would be at least 2 printers on a project, sometimes 3 if it was a bigger one. And so when you began there, you were just put on a team, and you learned by participating in it and doing it. And you learned pretty fast because you were under a certain amount of pressure. Artists would come from far away, and it was usually a 2-week period of time that they would be at the studio. They would stay with Catherine in her home, and we would just work and work and work. I remember really late nights because you would do what you had to do, but you learn quickly. And, all we did at Crown Point was etching in those days. So that's all I do. That's what I know. I'm not a full service printer. I don't do screen printing or lithography. And we may be doing photogravure before long, but we haven't even really done that. We've always focused here at Wingate on just the very traditional forms of etching. So
and photogravure because of Leo?
Well, James has had some experience with photogravure too. And I think at this point, it's really just a matter of space where we would do it. Space is always the problem. And this is a sort of a large studio in a way, but it's also oddly shaped and strung together. And so right now it's set up for exactly what we need to do these things. So, but I think, photogravure could be effective, but if we've needed gravure plates, we've contracted them out from people like John Goodman. There's another gravure guy about 8 miles north of me, Paul Taylor, ran Renaissance Press for many years. And he went to RISD and kind of taught himself photogravure there, and then did a lot of work through the 80s, 90s, 2000s. And I believe he's still working too. But he and John were both good. And then most recently, we used Lothar Osterberg because I know Lothar is a Crown Point alumni, and he does great work. And
Yes, yeah, Lothar is amazing.
But here at Wingate, we really have just done traditional forms of etching.
Right. Well, yeah. So before we move on to specific projects and favorite artists, you really specialize in multiple color plate etching. But
yes.
So, I mean, we've talked about color printing on the pod, I'm sure. And I'm sure that I've probably mentioned, haters simultaneous color printing or whatever. But you don't do that.
No. Kath, and the way I do it is very much the way I was trained to do it at Crown Point, and Catherine had very specific ideas about how things, should be done. She had, I think, trained in England, but at Crown Point, the idea was that you'd use a plate for each color that you needed, and you would figure out ways to register them all together. What you wanted in the print, you put in the plate. It was all etched, and we didn't leave lots of tone. We were instructed to wipe things cleanly. Dry points are a little bit different, but it was really about making the plates and printing them and letting the plates represent the whole print rather than leaving a lot of tone. And we never did, that sort of viscosity type printing or anything like that there. And it's very effective in terms of the way I work with artists. It's a good way to do it. So I've adopted most of the things that I learned there and just kept at it. We used a lot of color there. It was always dry pigment. We would mix dry pigments just with plate oil and print with that. And we didn't even have steel facing in those days at the studio. So we never really steel faced anything, but the additions were small. That wasn't usually an issue, except you lose that ability to get the bright color if you don't have the steel. And somehow we managed, to work with pigments that did okay with that. So
wait, hold on, back up.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I get too technical?
No. I've never heard anybody say that about bright colors. What do you mean?
Well, copper will oxidize certain pigments, yellows, whites, reds. White is the worst. It just looks gray sometimes if you print it on a bare sheet of copper. But once you steel face it, that negates that effect. So when we're doing projects, it's always a little bit of a problem because we're working on the plates and we keep going back at them over and over, and we're proofing everything. But we don't actually steel face things until we get to the end because we, at that point, we want to preserve the plates, but that changes the color each time. So, at the very end, you often have to scramble a little bit to readjust colors. Steel face everything.
So when you're auditioning in the final runs with the steel faced copper plates, you have to tamp the color down or brighten it up?
Well, if it's brighter and the artist likes it, we don't have to do it. And that's often the case. We're kind of going for the maximum effect if we can get it. But we've had to mix it down too. And we don't steel face everything. If we don't have to, we don't. But it is really helpful. And it, for prints they really depend on the colors like Walton Ford's prints. And even at Crown Point, the first project I had to do as a lead printer, and this was after about, I don't know, I must have been working for a year, a little more than a year. And Ken said, okay, I want you to lead the next project. It's going to be Joan Jonas, who was an amazing performance artist. And that turned out to be, a kind of a hard project for me. It was a huge, big, flat black aqua tints with sugar lift, bright reds and yellows on this black. And so we had to get these aqua tints really heavy and even. And I'm kind of amazed. In those days, we worked with all mixed pigments from color, but our black was always graphic chemical 514 black that came in a can. And over the years, I learned that that's not the strongest black there is. It's kind of weak compared to some other pigments. And oh man, I could have saved some plates if I'd known about ink back then. But the project came out really well. I still love it. And she was doing a performance in Berkeley that year at the museum. And I love that she's really in the news a little bit again. People are looking at her work, and she's a great artist, Joan Jonas.
Yeah. So, I mean, still facing, I've always understood to be a thing that you do to preserve the basically the line work and everything to make sure that it doesn't degrade over time in the printing thing. But I never thought about it in terms of color.
The iron coating is harder than copper, and so it does that. It protects delicate. Dry point lines, maybe not so much, because they're just subject to relentless pressure, but especially spit bites, delicate things like that. And so we do steel face to preserve plates. And with Walton's prints, particularly, we've done some pretty large editions, so it's really essential for that. But the color thing is a secondary effect that makes a huge difference.
Somebody we were talking to, I forget who, was telling us that I'm embarrassed that I can't remember. That they would put the steel facing on, they'd proof, they'd take it off, and they'd go do something else, and they'd put it back on.
Yeah, you can strip it off. That's one of the advantages of it. You have to put it in a little nitric acid, but it's a very small percentage. We do that. We've had instances where we thought we were pretty much finished and steel faced and then needed to take it off. It's not hard to do that, but you always worry a little bit when you do things like that. Plates are easy to damage and they're delicate things. So if we don't have to do it, we don't.
The other thing I wanted to ask about was, I can't remember what I've told people on the pod and what I haven't, but when you're doing color, I've always described your options as separate plates for each color, but also that you could a la poupe ink something so that you have a little dab of red here and black on the other side, whatever. Do you do that?
Yes, I do. I mean, that's something that I think we all do when necessary. And there are lots of instances where we can get a couple colors on a plate, especially if they're separated enough from each other. But if they're not, we will do the a la poupe thing, and we can kind of ink two things and carefully wipe them. I've done a lot more of that subsequent to my Crown Point time. That wasn't a place we really did that very much that I recall. But I mean, we did things like burning things on the press bed and running them through the press. So,
Well, okay. So now that you've teased us with that little tidbit, you have to tell us about John Cage wanting to burn things.
Well, John did come to the press every year, and it was a great time. He just, he had such an energy and spirit that he's one of my major heroes, and it was really delightful. He just made his whole life a piece of art in a way. But he had worked on a long, ongoing project, Changes and Disappearances, that he had to keep working on over a series of years. And I think Catherine wanted to push him into another thing. So the first project I worked on with him, Paul Singdalson and I worked on it, and it was called On the Surface. And he had us go find a bunch of scrap plates out in the back room. And some of them might have scratches on them or not. And then he would create systems so that he could ask the I Ching the questions and let things develop on their own. So he had an idea set up of a horizon line in this print that would continually come down, and whenever a plate crossed over that horizon line, it had to be cut. So as we would print it, we're printing basically bare pieces of copper with little bits of tone or maybe a scratch here and there. And they're getting smaller and smaller and becoming these kind of triangular fragments. And it's such a beautiful thing. I mean, it was on this lovely handmade Donald Farnsworth paper, and we would use felts in the dryer when we dried them, because we wanted to preserve the plate mark of the plates as much as we could. So you get the embossed effect. And the other thing with him was color. Basically, there were a certain number of colors we had, and then there was every possible combination of those colors that were part of his calculations. And so we would have huge palettes of little bits of weird browns and greens and just insane amounts of color that were just chosen by chance in a way, but he would set up these systems that would turn out to make very, very beautiful visual art. And then in the following year, he decided that he wanted to see what would happen if we burned the paper as we were printing with it. And so we basically crumbled up newsprint on the press bed, got an old set of felts, and I believe the first ones were done on regular heavyweight paper. We would just let the fire burn for a minute, drop the thing on it, and then we would run it through the press, and it would put out all the fire, and it would leave it charred and bits of newspaper in it, which we would pick out. And then there was an additional procedure where he had at home these little iron Japanese teapots, and he and Merce had this beautiful apartment in the city, and they had a lot of woodblock counters. And at one point, he had put the hot teapot down on one of his counters, and it had burned a dark ring on the counter. So he wanted to use the teapot to brand these prints, essentially. And so, there were grids so that when you asked the etching where to put it, he would know, and he would look at the next answer. He actually had a computer printout of the etching.
Oh my!
In the old days, when computers, had the perforated size, right, and it was just this big sheet. I mean, big pile of them. But then we would heat up the pot and put the teapot down on the print. So they had rings, sometimes partially on them, sometimes fully on them, and these burns, and they were beautiful. And that was late in my time at Crown Point. He went on to do a lot more burns there. And then after I was working with Ben Schiff here, when Ben left the book club and started doing his own publishing, at that time I introduced him to John, and we started doing some more fire prints that Ben put into a very ambitious book that I don't think was really ever fully published, but we did a lot of burn prints on Gompi that were quite beautiful. And when you put them together, you could kind of see through everything. And those were really beautiful too.
I think I thought those rings were like, a coffee ring from a spill on the counter or something. That's what I think. I always thought that's what those were.
No, that his idea was, it was an accidental thing, his discovering how to do that.
Yeah.
At one point, he had us take a bunch of odd materials, paper, felt, and just lay them out in Oakland on the streets in different places and let them be out there for 24 hours. And then we went back and collected everything. And then we made huge collages out of them. I'd forgotten about those prints. I don't have one of those anymore, but those were really big, odd things with, pieces of felt cut out and pasted on them, and odd chincollade.
Were the sheets put out in the weather, like on a road, so things were driven over or walked on?
I think sometimes, sometimes they were. Who do I remember driving over things with? I can't remember that, but mostly they were on sidewalks and gutters and things like that, and people had walked over them. Or mostly they just had wear and tear of being out in the elements
Okay.
for a little while.
Huh.
He was always full of really interesting ideas that most of the time turned out to be quite quite beautiful visually. It was. I still have a number of my John Cage prints, and
Oh, nice.
I love them.
For me, in the visual lexicon, it's like the turn to conceptual art in a way, and they're like ugly beautiful. Like they're so
There's that
random
quality.
and everyday, and like there's such a non-intentionality about them, but there
Yeah.
is, they're so great.
On one visit, he brought a big bag of stones back from Japan, and this set of prints was titled Ryoku, and he used these stones. I don't know what they thought in customs, but he he would trace them onto plates, just dry point tracings of these stones, and we would ink them up in colors and print those. And those, I think, are some of my favorite ones. They're just accidentally so lovely.
Do you feel like there's an artist that you worked with either at Crown Point or subsequently that you could jump into their swim lane and like just you're just so in affinity with them that it's you feel that kind of, this is
Usually
my
that's a
person?
process as you're on the project. I think it almost always happens that you become really engaged with the artist's practice in a way that you didn't know you could be before you started. But Saul LeWitt for me was really the guy. I got that. I wasn't an artist myself, so I didn't have that as a skill, unfortunately. But I understood that work in a way that I just really got it. And I worked with Saul again here at Wingate years later, and he gave me ideas and things I still work with. Those color grids that we use to determine different colors. He taught me to do that when we worked on the complex forms prints. So
I don't think LeWitt is necessarily that easy. Like I think you're selling yourself short.
no, but I was more interested in the idea art in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think I didn't have a lot of visual art training. That became my training when I started. At this point, I've learned a little bit about it, but I I got geometry really well. And the first project was this thing where he had us go through the press and photograph all the details of the press. He had made a book called Autobiography, where he did that in his New York apartment. So it was all everything he had in his place, the things on the wall, the coffee cups, the bathroom, everything. And we did the same thing. And so we had to take all the pictures and then we had to develop them. And then he arranged them into the grids. And then we had to make photo etchings of them. We didn't use a gravure there. And this was in the days of really nasty, toxic photochemical stuff. But we did.
We did it.
And we'd get in the dark room. We had to use centrifuges and that awful KPR photoresist, and we just had to do tons and tons of testing. The plates were probably about 20 by 12, maybe, and there were 16 image. There were 32 images on one plate because they were a double page spread, 16 on each side. But some of them were of the ceilings, which were all white with maybe a wire going over it. And other ones were of really dark, flooring. And so you had to do the bumping and dodging and all of that stuff to get these photographs to all be able to read on the same plate. We just kept doing it until we got it right. We tried it on copper at one time. That didn't work. So we went back to zinc. These were zinc plates. And once the plates were done, then it had to all be printed. So I wasn't technically a printer then. And so Paul and Kevin wiped the plates. I stood at the press kind of behind them while they wiped all day long. And then they would give me the plate, and with clean hands, I'd get the paper and crank it through the press and put it down in the stamp pack. But I watched them all the time. And at the end of their time of printing, somebody said, "Hey, why don't you see if you can wipe one of these?" And it kind of came pretty naturally just because I was familiar with all the physical motions that they needed to use. And they were hard plates to get right. They had to be wiped really well.
Did you have a background in photography at all?
Not much. I mean, I knew how to develop black and white things. My
Oh,
grandfather had
oh,
let
right,
me
right.
use his darkroom at times. So I knew a little bit about that. But no, it was just you take the problem and then you deal with it. And that's kind of how this business is, I feel like.
Yeah. Universally, all of the printers we've talked to talk about being problem solvers, period. Like that's
Yeah,
the bottom
yeah.
line. Yeah.
Well, you're with an artist and you want to be able to do what they want. And so you feel compelled to do that.
Right. Tell us a little bit about working with Walton Ford.
Boy, that's been, one of the highlights of my life, I think, working with Walton. He's a very entertaining person. And we've done a lot of prints now. I mean, I think we're up to 14 or 15 maybe. But we started with that large set of 6 birds, the Blue Heron press set of etchings. And I met Walton, I think, in 1997. And by that time, I was starting to maybe do a little publishing here, but I was still doing a lot of contract work. I got a call from, I guess, from Judith Goldman, who was partnered with Paul Kasman on that. The two of them were essentially Blue Heron Press. They were looking for a studio for him to work in that wasn't in New York. Walton was kind of a wild guy, and they were just afraid of distractions and things in the city. And I think they thought I was a little closer geographically to where he was living out in the Berkshires. And so we're here in the Connecticut River Valley. But it's not more than I think it's under 2 hours to get there. And all 3 of them came. Walton came with Paul and Judith to see the studio and to meet me. And Walton and I really just kind of got each other, I think, right away. He was thrilling. I mean, he would come with music. He would come with piles of books. In the old days, it would be books and CDs. Nowadays, it's just a computer, and we just keep printing out stuff. But he needed that material to work, and so they told me what they wanted to do, which was to create a portfolio of 6 large prints that were on the size of the double folio Audubon Birds of America. So they would kind of mimic that. They would all be color prints. I knew that. I can't remember what estimate I gave them for that project originally, but it was so far off of what it turned out being. I mean, each one of those prints took us about a year to get done. And that was mainly because, we would work in visits of 3 or 4 days at a time. And then Walton was also busy painting and doing other things. So I'd have to kind of catch him when he wasn't really involved in getting ready for a show.
And he couldn't just
But
like hand over a drawing and you would do it. He would have to be deeply involved.
no, that's not the way he's worked here at all. But he would start with a drawing that he would bring usually. We did a small print that we started at Brandeis one year, and he showed up on the morning, and I said, "So what's the drawing?" He said, "Well, I don't have it yet, but here, I'll just do it."
Oh my God.
And that turned out to be an incredible, beautiful print, the little Bangalore print of a little kingfisher with a lure in its mouth. When we first got started, we bonded over music, particularly. We were both big fans of various things, and we shared a lot of that.
Like what?
We had Guided by Voices on the player all the time,
Guided by
and it was up
voices.
loud. Yeah, this crazy guy Robert Pollard, who made a bunch of songs in his basement with his friends, and was very influential on bands like the Pixies and bands from that era. I taught him about Steve Earle. It was good. And I think by temperament, I like doing the job that I do, which is kind of being the secondary, just being there to take care of things rather than leading it. And Walton's a very alpha style person. And at first, he didn't know what was happening. He hadn't made prints really. And, this is a pretty large scale thing. He had a beautiful drawing of this hornbill, and we started that print, and we started it with a large hard ground line etching, because we transferred the drawing just by kind of tracing and flipping it onto a plate. So when he does this, he starts with a drawing, he then flips the drawing and redraws it onto the plate backwards. And then he actually draws it with the needle, scratching through the ground. So he really kind of compresses the image into its most basic parts, which is what we want for our registration system. Once we have that line etching, that becomes our key plate. And we make color plates by offsetting that line plate onto those aquatints so that we know where to do things. We literally print it, and then we print it back onto those blank aquatints.
What? Wait.
So we have the key plate,
yeah,
and you ink it up and you print it, but you catch it under the roller at the end, the tail of the paper, you peel it back. You use our registration bar, which again is a crown point thing where we just have a piece of copper that we fasten to the press bed in a way, and then the plates can all be positioned in the exact same place. We put a blank aquatint in there and reduce the pressure a little bit and just run that paper over it. We can pull it, put it in another plate, run it back, and usually we can get up to 3 offsets on a print like that.
Wow.
If needed.
Oh, that's cool.
So, at first, he saw what we were doing, but I think he was kind of uncertain. And they had a big kind of tree branch that it was sitting on, and the bird was gray. But what I had him do was to put yellow on one color plate and blue on another. And I used those color grids to determine how much of each of those colors I wanted. And when we put that together, the bird just was this beautiful gray, it was just the right color. And when he saw that, it was kind of like the bell went off in his head a little bit. And he realized how we were building these. And, they were just a ton of work because there was a lot of detail. That tree branch also had a nest that was the hornbill's nest, but it was full of parakeets that Walton used actually it was full of starlings. And Walton kind of used those as a metaphor for Western interlopers.
Oh.
And they had all taken over the bird's nest, and they were all there, and the bird was looking at them. And there was a lot of foliage and color, and Walton always uses the setting to describe where this is. A lot of his early paintings were about their travels in India. He and Julie had gone with their young daughter to India. She got a grant to go as a painter, and he just saw things that kind of caused him to get these ideas about how he wanted to represent things that were happening. And this whole tech explosion was happening. And, he had one painting of one kingfisher on a branch lecturing to a bunch of other little kingfishers. And it was about Bill Gates basically coming to India and everybody worshiping him. He could see things really clearly. And that's what I think makes his prints so interesting, is all the ideas and stories that he has behind them.
Yeah, they're not just birds.
No, they're not. And animals now too, and even sometimes people, but people get a short shrift.
Well, the birds are just so beautiful. I mean, flora, fauna.
They can be, and then there's his painting of a giant starling, that needs to be fed, and all these other birds are cramming food into its mouth. And he can take beautiful things and really make them grotesque at the same time. And that's part of the push-pull thing of those paintings and prints. It's interesting. The prints really hold up well against the paintings. Taschen has done a number of books of his work, and we've actually made some prints for 2 of those books, for the real limited edition ones. But when you see a photograph of a print and you see a photograph of a painting, very often they're quite similar. Of course, he paints with watercolor gouache, and we used a lot of spit bite to make it feel like that. So we can really kind of imitate much of what he's doing in his painting. And over time, he's gotten very adept at it. And, we really know what we're doing when we get together now. But it's very fun, and it's always an adventure. And it's not always easy to do what we want and get the result we want. So we're always fighting those kind of problems. But I've been very proud of those prints. The first set of 6 took about 7 years. There's a great story. David Keel at the time was the curator at the Whitney, and he knew about Walton's work. He was pretty fascinated with his work, and he heard about this project, but that it was happening. And Judith Goldman had been a curator at the Met as well, I believe. So she was connected to David. And
she was at the Whitney. Yeah, she was the adjunct print curator when I was there in 1986.
Wow. Wow. Well, life is long, sometimes it seems like yesterday, and
yeah, exactly.
It doesn't. But he heard about it, and the original plan was to do 6 of these and to release them at $2,000 a piece. And so he plunked down 12,000 and had to wait 7 years. I mean, it was sight unseen, really. But by the time we finished, I think Walton maybe was already having his show at the Brooklyn Museum, which was a huge moment in his career and really kind of boosted his visibility a lot. And those prints have sold for much more than that.
So sure.
So he got a really good deal. What was lovely, though, was that he put them up. And once they were finished, he did a little show of those prints. All 6 of the big blue heron prints that we did were up and framed. And I mean, because really, Paul was selling them a lot, but he was selling them to people who wanted to buy them and take them home, and I just never really saw them around very much until then. So it was fun to sit there and watch people engage with them as they went through. I really loved that.
Nice.
Quietly. But.
Yeah. Nice. Oh, that's great. Walton's watercolors obviously are amazing. The one show I caught at the time, there were these gigantic mural size gorilla heads. I was like, yes. What is happening?
He had a pretty wild early years, and I enjoyed that with him. But at a certain point, he decided to not be so wild. And I mean, he got sober is what happened, and he's really done an amazing thing since then. I feel like with working with all the people in his life and making things right.
Right.
It's such a pleasure to still work with him. And he's very, he couldn't be more complimentary about what goes on here. I think he really does like that process and what we do. And it's not always like that you build such a relationship with someone, but very often we have people that we make work with who then come back and, make more work with us. We like to repeat.
Yeah, for sure. But you're not publishing Walton's things, or you are now?
I think our next one probably will be.
Okay.
And Paul was very generous. The blue heron prints were tricky because that was a contract job, and I had to renegotiate that contract a couple of times. I should have done a little better for myself on that. But once we finished that and began to make other prints that were separate from that team, that were just by Paul, published by the gallery, he gave me a situation where we could have more prints when we made the projects, and we were able to sell prints if we wanted to when we got the money up a little bit closer to where it should be for all the work we were putting in. I just had no idea they were going to be as complicated and intricate as they were when we started.
Well, and even if you now know exactly how you and Walton work together, it doesn't make it any less complicated.
No, I don't think so, except that we do have a kind of way of working that we're familiar with. And that does speed things up. I think we can do it more quickly than we used to. And of course, I'm not around here as much these days. I'm trying to be retired. So
how's that going?
James will be leading some of these projects. It's going great, actually. I mean, I'm really happy with how things have gone here. Our publishing program is much more active than it's ever been, and I think he's making amazing choices of artists to work with, which is really one of the hardest things we do, and then getting them to come. It's not cheap to make prints this way with people. It does require that we have a way to kind of get some money out of it once we do it. James went to school and studied art, so he's got a little bit more of an art, I think, background, which is helpful to him. And he had time in Philadelphia with friends creating a gallery and curating work that they were all interested in as young kids. And of course, I worked with a lot of artists from very different generations. I worked with Saul here, and I worked with Bob Kushner here, who I also worked with at Crown Point. And that's changed. Obviously, most of those artists aren't around anymore. And he's done a great job of finding young, emerging, exciting people to work with. And emerged, I should say, because people emerge quickly these days.
Yes, that's true. For better or worse. But James is so fortunate, and well, obviously you are as well, to have a child who's interested, has the same kind of facility. Like it all
I
came
don't know
together
what's wrong
perfectly.
with him, honestly.
It's amazing.
It wasn't something I would have wished on him, but he grew up around it. And it probably looked like a lot of fun from what he saw when he was a kid. Projects can turn into a good time. And we usually tried to make it that. And I just think he got enough. He worked with me when he was in high school. He would come and print and do that. And he went to college and did some other art things, became a painter for a little while. I think we kind of have a similar way of thinking about the process. And so when we work together, it's very easy. We had Jill Mosier here in the middle of the winter, a very snowy winter, to make a set of prints. It was kind of early on of James being part of the team here, but at the end, she just said, "You guys are so good together. It's really amazing how well you function." He knows the processes now, but he also has a good sense of how to engage with the artist. At Crown Point, we weren't supposed to really engage with the artist in that way. The artist would stay with Catherine. And of course, she did the engaging with the artists, and she had a lot of ideas about the work. But of course, once you're in the project, you're engaged in a way that is undeniable. I was always someone to avoid trying to influence the print very much. And James has a better sense of subtly making a suggestion that is actually, turns out to be a helpful one.
Right. Yeah. You got to learn to read the artist, I guess. I'm always curious about how comfortable printers feel about saying, "Tell me about the conceptual rigor of your print, dude."
Yeah. And I think originally I just kind of lacked confidence in my knowledge about those things.
Right.
And that was one thing that kept me quiet. It's a daunting thing to do this. It's not the easiest thing. Artists can be all kinds of different people. And it took me a long time to feel like I was up to the task. I'd always be pretty anxious about projects. Of course, at Crown Point, if you have to work with Stephen Corn or Wayne Thiebaud or somebody, and the whole press kind of is relying on that, that's a stressful thing too. But I did get over that at some point. You never know that a project's going to be okay. It's always an open question when you start. But I finally began to feel like I've done this enough that it's probably going to be okay. I'm going to try not to worry so much.
It's very similar to learning how to do critiques with artists or studio visits or something.
Yeah, I think so. And I had not had that experience, but that is what we do. Once we make the proof, we put it on the wall. We have to sit and look at it and talk about it. I'm comfortable with that now, but I do feel like it's in good hands with James. He's really good at that.
Yeah. It is intimidating for sure. I'm always like, I hope I can think fast enough to figure out what the hell I'm seeing, I want to ask you about two artists and then we'll probably have to wrap it up. One of the last things that I bought before I left the museum was the Ambrine Butt set.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which are fabulous works.
Mm-hmm.
And I had wanted for a long time.
I'm really proud of those prints too. Those were published by us. One of the earlier publishing things that I did before James was here, but she was living in the Boston area. I heard about her work. It was great, different galleries that I was working with on other contract jobs had mentioned her to me. And I got the idea that this is someone I should try to publish. So I went and met her and talked with her. At the time, she was 7 or 8 months pregnant. So there was no way she was coming to the studio at that point. So it had to wait for a while. And this was her second child, I believe. So we did that whole project with her coming here on a driving everyday business and driving home. It's like a 2-hour drive. And that really kind of spread it out a lot over time, which in some ways hurts the continuity. You know, once you get working and you're kind of in the swing of it, the artist is also in the swing of it and you're moving together. And so when you stop and start a lot, that can make it a little bit hard. We did, I think, is it 5 images in that? 5 total images. She had been doing a lot of veiled things in her paintings. And so we decided we could use chine-collé and we could print things underneath the sheen and print things on top and create some of that effect. So a few of those prints had chine-collé. And then there were 2, the dot ones, the gray one and the white one. It was amazing how long it took us to get the color for that. When you look at them now and you see that they're white and gray, but the basis of those 2 prints were 3 plates that had open dots on them that she just made these round dots on all 3 of the plates. We'd etched aqua tints, and so they were little holes in the color. And she wanted to print all 3 of those plates together to make, different colors. At one point, I had a class visit in here while we were in the proofing stages of that. Umbreen wasn't here. And I put up the color proofs of one of those prints, and they went all the way around the studio and back up. There were about 30 of them. And what we had started with was kind of a gray and white. And what we ended up with was a gray and white. And they're so subtle because each of those colors is shifted in a different direction. One's warmer, one's cooler, one's neutral. And so you see that result in the dots, but it's really subtle, but it really works. And all these other color things just were not. Sometimes it takes a long time to figure that out.
Right.
And once we completed it, that said, it's been really successful for us. And Umbreen since has moved to Texas, but we're in touch with her. And I think we're actually now talking about having her come back and do something new.
That's great. Because her kids must be slightly into their early teenage years.
I mean, at this point, yeah, it's a very different situation.
Right.
It was hard for her. I don't know how she did that, coming and going with the 2. I know what it's like to have 2 kids that age.
Me too.
And to do a 4-hour commute and a print project and then come home to them. That's tough.
When you're a female artist and you read about female artists who made decisions about whether or not to have families. And
yeah.
I always give more kudos to the artists who are like, I have to make this thing, even though it's costing me, hours of sleep. And
it's very hard. And that's always been an issue for women artists, I think. I like to see in the coming generations, I like the way my kids are being with their families, and they're pretty much dead equal in how they care for their kids, but there's still all that work to do. So you have to make those choices. My wife Deb, who is an artist, she taught pretty much her whole life, which she loved doing and made a huge contribution to the world doing, but it kept her from being able to have a full-time practice, and she sacrificed that in that way. So many women had to.
So, as I looked across my colleagues and the people who didn't have children for whatever reason, choice or not, and me, like having kids set me back 5 years, 7 years in terms of progressing professionally.
There is no doubt. And so let's be fair about it. Everybody's responsible for our children. We'll get there, I hope.
I hope so. But
are a little gloomy right now, but
I wouldn't give up my kids for the world, they're
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. And I mean, some people just have the kids anyway, but ignore them, and kids can suffer from that. It's really artists have to be pretty self-interested, I feel like, to be able to do what they do. It requires focus and when you're all in, once you're actually painting and having shows and doing things, you've got to travel. You have responsibilities in order to maintain what's going on. So the other partner is going to be the one to pick up the slack. The Wingate Studio would never have been able to survive without Deb behind the scenes. I mean, not just taking care of my family stuff, but cooking meals for us, and making the place a hospitable and wonderful place for people. And she worked in here with me in the early days. We would print plates together when she was pregnant with Olivia, I think. We had some big Maplethorpe gravures we were printing for somebody. It was in the heat of the summer. There was no air conditioning here, and would start early in the morning and print till about 1 and then go sit in the river and cool down for the rest of the day.
Nice. So the other ones that I wanted to ask you about, one is, I think, behind you, the Xyler Jane
Yes.
crazy manic color things. What the heck?
Boy, oh boy. That's just a kind of test proof. We were doing so much color proofing on those. You've seen the set, I think, the set of 6. I love her work. She's such a good painter, such an interesting painter. And I had always wanted to work with her. We made another print some years ago before James was here, and it was a kind of a magic square, a set of numbers. But originally I had seen her at a museum opening at the De Cordova, I think.
Oh.
And something I rarely do, but I sucked it up and I walked up to her and I introduced myself and I gave her a little card and I said, I'd love to work with you if you ever feel like you want to make prints. I live nearby. She's 15, 20 minutes away from here. She evidently did call me at some point, but what I thought I was talking to was someone who wanted me to print some posters, which of course we would get that a lot. Can you print me 500 cards or something? And she actually did want me to make a poster. She creates a calendar every year.
Oh.
These crazy, beautiful calendars. And she was looking for someone to commercially print that, which I couldn't have done anyway, really. But somehow, finally, we connected. I think she must have called me again about something. I had a studio visit with her and we talked about it. And I just loved her work so much. And I thought it will make incredible prints the way she works. There's a lot of different ways that she works. And the dots are one of them. This project this took us a long time. This is one of our more complicated, or at least labor intensive things, because there's 3 plates of dots and 1 plate of background color. And every dot on each plate was actually hand applied in sugar lift, except for the background plate where it was hand applied in asphaltum as a stop out. Perfect little round circles that James sat at the table and did with the back end of a paintbrush. Dip it in the sugar lift, set it down. And I should preface that all by saying the first thing we did was we made a grid plate that had grids that were essentially the size that the dots could set in. And that became our key plate for doing all this. So each plate would have that grid on it. And then he would look at the grid and he would look at our drawings that we were working from and have to figure out where to put the dots. And then the dots all had to register, together with each other. It was really kind of crazy. We did a lot of testing, which we always do, I think, to get it to a point where we thought we could control it. And then we made these plates, and the possibilities are kind of endless once you have the plates with color. And so we proofed a lot on this. There's a whole bunch of actually quite beautiful different versions of these. She agreed to sign some of them because they're just too nice to not use. It took us well over a year to get that all together, and we had a portfolio made for it. That's not usual for us, but they seem to require it. I love them. I think they're the most beautiful things. I spent a lot of time with them. You don't always love things right away, when you've been on a project, but those I never. You could ask James though; he may not love them in quite the same way.
They make me think like you could do a great show about using the grid in printmaking, like those Chuck Closes that Bill Hall
that kind of
did.
thing.
Yeah, with Julia and the Charles Gaineses that Pam and Rhea are doing. And there's so many.
Now she's got a new idea for a print based on these daily drawings that she does. So we're likely to be working in soft ground on these. They're colored lines. Every day she does one. And she was thinking maybe we could make a large version of one of these. So we're doing tests on that now to see how that's going to go.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
So you have retired, quote unquote, semi-retired, and passed the business to your son, James. And so how many days a week are you in the shop?
I come in every morning and start a fire in the stove, and I hang around a little. And I've had to make the decision that I'm just not going to print anymore. I actually love to print, and I've done it all my life, but it has taken a toll on me. And I went through a lot of shoulder surgeries. It creates enough pain that I don't want to do it so much anymore. But we have a new, really great, capable printer with us. James is a great printer, and I'm happy to be around on projects and work on things in that way. I think that's going to be my role, is to just be there. As other printers have said, 3-4 heads are better than one doing this. It's good to have the support and to be on a team. And so, as long as I feel like I love to do that part too. So I still can. And I think I will keep doing it in that way.
Okay. And now you can go back to being the clean hands.
There you go. They aren't always clean because a lot of the time I'm out back in the barn fixing tractors and stuff, which, that's my retirement job, is keeping the farm machinery going.
Right. So Olivia is running the property as an organic farm.
This farm is now again a farm. I should say that I love this place very much, and it's been really a joy to be able to live here. My parents lived in the house here with my grandmother until she died, and they lived in the house until they died. My daughter now lives in that house with her 2 children. She has an active farm that's partially an egg farm. They have about 1,000 chickens that they do in a kind of free range, roaming through the fields all summer system. And then they grow a lot of vegetables and do farmers markets. And so the studio is here and it coexists with this farm. And when artists come here, they can kind of immerse themselves in this place too. I have a really deep sense of its history, its native history. I've done a lot of studying on the people who lived here before us. This was Pecomtuck and Abenaki and Nipmuc territory.
Wow.
The river, the Connecticut River, was, a place where they all gathered.
Sure.
And there's a lot of that history here.
Right.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. And you must have colonial history and Revolutionary War history. And
I don't think I could have done this in New York with the people that I was working with. It would have been too expensive for me. Being here in this space, allowed me the time to get things going enough to be able to make it work. And plus, I like to live here. I did think about whether I should be in New York or Boston or, someplace more central to the art world. But artists seem to like coming here to visit. When we can get them here, they're very happy. So we try to make it a full experience. We've got all these good vegetables to eat and fresh eggs and all the time in the studio you want.
And when artists come, can they stay with you or are they staying nearby?
We built a little artist apartment in the back of the farmhouse where Olivia lives. It's kind of a big rambling thing. There's a space up there with a little kitchen and a full bathroom. And so artists can be on their own. we usually eat together, but they're free to, to take the time they need. And we work on their schedule. I'm a morning person, but not all artists are.
No, I'm pretty worthless after 4 p.m.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's not do an interview at night. So, do you have plans to shift more into retirement, or are you just happy doing what you're doing?
I like being here. I'm happy to be able to be a little more part of the farm, because there's a lot of labor to do and never enough people. And I like the being outside and, being part of that. I'm still, paying a lot of attention to the art world. I love going to the last IFPDA fair. It's good to see all the friends of ours that we've known for so long. I just think, I'm going to do it as much as possible for me. But I did love printing, and I will miss that. That's something that it was just part of my nature that, I could be at a hot plate all day with a bunch of plates, and and that was enough for me to be very happy.
I find it being in a print shop, like, I feel like they're the happiest places on earth. I mean, it's work, obviously, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, those first Walton prints, I printed the first two by myself, 6 plates, 24-36, all, needing to be wiped and ready to go. And we did those on the French tool press too. We did not have a motorized press, so that was a lot of, pulling, and took a toll on my body. I had to hire other people to do that, a lot of that work, finally.
Yeah, I think people probably think that the noxious chemicals are going to get you, but it's the tear on the body is.
We'll see which one gets me first.
Right.
I consider myself an experiment in that.
I think everybody is.
We're careful of the things as much as we can, but we've learned what's bad for us. And, we use aquatint rosin, but we don't breathe it. We protect ourselves, and we use ventilation tables and things to try to pull solvents away from us. But I'm pretty old school, and I really need the materials that I've worked with all my life to be able to do it properly. And it gets hard to find a lot of those things as well. We have to continually make up new versions of them so that we can keep doing it.
Yeah, that's been a through line for sure with all the printers, the various ink that you can no longer get, the various papers you can't get anymore, oh God, I tell you. I've also talked to printers, mostly printers who are retired but haven't passed on a business of some sort to other people. So, and what they've done with their printers proofs, and some have sold them and some have not. And like, what do you do with that kind of
We
thing?
haven't not got a plan. Especially more recently, we've been trying to do a really good job of keeping the archive, keeping one of everything for that purpose. I sold a lot of printers proofs over the years just to be here and to have a house and to do what I'm doing. And I do wish I had a couple of those back, but we're always making more prints. I've worked with a whole lot of artists, some of whom, museums maybe aren't interested in, but many who they are. And people kind of come in and out of fashion as well. It's kind of interesting.
Yes, for sure.
Like those Joan Jonas prints now are kind of more interesting to people just because she's still working and doing interesting stuff.
And suddenly we're all paying attention to mid and late career women artists because
Yes.
hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know where they'll go
Okay.
at this point. But
Would you have a favorite that's hanging over your bed or over the couch, or?
we change them around in the house. Actually, we have an old painting of James hanging over our bed, but in the living room, we've got some nice wall space. And I think right now I have, it's a black and white wall. I have Walton's big Nantes print, the big monkey, the strangling the parrot in France, all black and white. And then Saul LeWitt's Complex Forms aquatint that's black and, all the different grays. That's kind of a nice wall together.
Nice. Yeah, black and white is usually the default in our house, and every now and again I'll hang something in color, and my husband's like, "What the hell is that?"
we are known for doing all this color stuff, but I love working in black and white. And, some artists have really pushed that and made really beautiful things. Daniel Rios Rodriguez came and we had to cut a bunch of shaped plates for him, but he just used every single technique on them, but they're all black. He added some color and some with some kind of monoprint style adding over the etched plate, but there's plenty of possibilities in black and white, and many people have proven that.
Yeah, for sure. A true Ludwig would always say to me, "There's a world of color in black and white." Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're right. Because you start seeing things in color that are black and white. It's crazy.
We made a cool plate of the studio. Painter Gideon Bach came here, and he's always painted his studio interiors. Really and fascinating. They're cluttered and filled with music equipment and albums. We tried to make a print in his studio, but I couldn't really work in the bathroom very well with rinsing plates. So he came here. He said, "Wait till someone's working. Let me come." And he'd gotten a Guggenheim, so he just said, let's do this. And we made a 3-plate print of the studio, which was all in reverse because he really had to draw it as he looked at it. That's his practice. But it's so beautiful, and it was 3 different blacks, really. It was, a warm black, a cool black, a neutral black, but it really did have kind of a world of color in it just from making those little shifts.
Nice.
And he came back later on, and we made a color print out of it and added some plates. That's very fun to do. And, I keep all the plates, and we cancel them if requested. But sometimes artists will want to redo something or reuse it in a different way. So we're always open to that.
Okay. Well, that's cool.
I had to cancel a lot of Louise Bourgeois plates back after she died. And we made cancellation proofs, actually. We made proofs for the museum and for her archive. And it was kind of painful. These were beautiful, full-size soft grounds and, amazing things. And Ben said, just cancel them with a big X. And I would put them on the table and just scratch a big X, the dry point X through them, and then we'd ink them up and print them. And all of those plates went, that was just all part of the archive. They were very careful about all that stuff. It was an amazing experience working on that. That consumed about 6 or 7 years here, I think, of time. And we made these big, full-size things, soft grounds, human scale. I have pictures of the printers holding them up, and you don't see their heads. You just see the tips of their toes kind of at the bottom.
Yeah, I think people have a hard time conceiving about the whole cancellation thing and why one would be pushed to do that. And it's, if there were a bunch of Picasso plates sitting around somewhere, one could easily see somebody nefariously printing them to make money. And you don't want that,
Yeah, I mean, with old master prints, you get that a lot, but then people are just aware of states and how real one of those prints actually is based on the amount of wear, I think, on the plate, probably.
Right.
Yeah, ever since prints have been made into this kind of a commodity where they're numbered and signed and all that, people try to be careful to make sure that certain rules apply so that there's some continuity and truth in what we're putting out there.
Right. Yeah. If you commit to doing a thing of 50 or whatever, like you should do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a social contract. We're all sticking to it.
Yeah. I'm willing.
That's right. I'm in. All right. Well, is there anything we haven't talked about that we want to talk about? And otherwise we should wrap it up.
Gosh, we've been all over the place.
I know. Did you write down like your most difficult, most challenging, your most fun?
I mean, it's hard to say. There have been so many. There was some at Crown Point. We did a Joyce Kozloff project at Crown Point that involves having a big decorative paper cast module made that we were then going to cut the prints up and put them into. It's called Homage to Robert Adam. And so it had all these decorative elements and I still have that. It's hanging at the top of the stairs in our house. But it was endless and took, registration wise was really complicated. And that was really early on in my printing career. And we've had some pretty tough ones here, but they always, once you get there, they don't seem so bad. And we're never afraid to work hard on it. That's the thing.
Sure.
You really got to be willing to give yourself up to it and figure out a way.
That's right. It's always worth it in the end.
Yeah.
Except for when you have multiple surgeries.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on Platemark. It's been a delight talking to you. You're one of my favorite people.
Oh, thank you. That's very generous. I appreciate it.
Well, no, I mean it.
Well, I feel the same way, and thank you.
I mean, there is a type that becomes a printer and a publisher and everything, but not everybody has the sort of, essence of, I don't know. You just have this essence about you, Peter, that's just so, I don't know. It's like you have a great combination of let the artist be out front, I'm going to step back, but also the problem solver, but also the sort of warmth and congeniality and this very sort of quiet charisma. I don't know. It's a perfect package. I love it.
Well, those are all printer skills. I think you find that in many of us, probably that.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's very, very, that's very nice.
Yes. Are you blushing?
Yes, a little bit.
I hope James was there to hear that. Okay. So
well, on the publishing side of things, I'm glad he's looking like he's going to be a better publisher than I was. I've always been the printer, that's what I love about it. So it was very hard at times to wear the other hat. And it's almost like being an artist and trying to sell your own work. It's very personal to you. And so that part always felt hard to me as well. And plus, we're in a location that is so off the map that we had to do something amazing to get people to notice us at all.
Right. Well, you did it. That all worked.
Oh, so far, so good.
Yeah.
I'm really, really thankful that James is going to take it. I mean, I don't feel a lot of need to hang on to it myself. And so I think it's in good hands.
That's awesome. You're a great team. All right. So again, thank you. You're a delight to talk to, as always. And I'm just so glad we got a chance to talk.
I am too. I appreciate it. There's so much more. We'll have to do another one sometime.
Right? That's all the printers say that. I've got more stories. We got to do another one. And I love the stories. The printers are, you guys are the nexus. Like that's, the artists can talk about their projects as something, but you are the one who knew how to solve the problem to get it to the thing to done,
Oh, yeah. Well, so many good printers out there, many who are now retired, but it's kind of amazing to me how much printing there is that I have no earthly idea about. I've met people at the print fairs who are, really into the sort of Midwest and all the print activity there. And that was something that I just, my journey has been very focused in one single way by doing the Crown Point thing and then just staying with that. So there's a lot, always so much to learn, really.
I think interviewing a range of printers can only benefit the ecosystem because there's so many great minds out there, Yeah, including yours. Yeah. All right, we should sign off. It was great talking to you. Thank you for coming on Platemark.
Thank you very much, Ann. Nice to talk.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Platemark with my guest, Peter Pettengill. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. He's a delight, and I love having conversations with him whenever I see him, which isn't often enough. Thank yous will go out to a variety of people as usual. One, of course, to Peter for being a wonderful guest. 2, to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. 3, to Dan Fury for his help with sound editing. And 1 also to Skip Barnhart and Lee Turner for sending me soundscapes from their studios for the podcast start. Images we talk about are over in the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. And while you're over at platemarkpodcast.com, sign up for our newsletter. I will send you notice of each new episode, and occasionally I will send you other things, but it's really not very often. So you can count on an email from me every other week. It's not that much, so you ought to do it. Also, we have a Facebook group you could join and start chatting with all of us. There's tons and tons of artists in there and lots of printers, and it's a warm and welcoming place. So I hope you'll come on over and check us out. You know, it's my goal to, I'm not trying to save the ecosystem, but I am trying to make sure that it endures and that it doesn't somehow die. And I hope you will help me in that effort by looking at, talking about, thinking about, engaging with prints, maybe even buying prints. Stay tuned for more on that. So come along with me. I think that's it. We'll see you next time.